Hello, humans. My name is Symbion Mc Cloud. So wherever the clouds are in your life around the world, I salute you and thank you for allowing you to share my story with you. It is our story, but it's my story to start. Once upon a time and place where possibility yearned for probability, I was standing in the woods. To be specific, I was in the Muir Woods on June the 13th, 2013. Among my brothers, the trees, the oak, the redwoods, the majestic redwoods, having an epiphany. I was an MD, PhD, geriatric neurologist, cognitive scientist, and environmental bioethicist. I was academically corrupted, and I was concerned about how health was viewed in our society. And I recognized, looking at my brother trees, that they represented for us some profound lessons about how to stay healthy over time. And so I became a tree doctor. Eventually, I found my name, Sylvanus, named for the Roman god of forests and their boundaries. Sylvanus was actually a private, not so popular Roman god that some believe was rather conspiratorial because the people living on the land adopted that god to manifest indigenous gods so that the Romans somehow wouldn't notice. However, Sylvanus is a rather austere name, so my lovely wife, Kathy, decided I needed a nickname, so you guys can call me Silly. Silly teaches human beings what they can learn about health metaphorically. Don't you all have roots? Don't you branch out? Don't you want aspiring views? Trees are a rich source of metaphor and language. They're also biological creatures that we depend on. In fact, through time, you can say that the history of human civilization has been written about our relationships, through our relationships with forests. We climbed out of them. We became creatures that lived in the savannah, but then we cleared the trees to do agriculture. And we use trees for masts and ships and buildings. So trees have been very helpful. And I have to say, we have not been very good in our relationships with trees. After the Muir Woods, I decided to go on a global journey to visit other forests and trees to see what I could learn about health from them. My colleagues in Toronto in the Legacy Project were where the tree doctor first appears as a character doing intergenerational work. So I recognized that health was all about intergenerational stories. I went to Brazil and worked with ideas from shamans. Although it wasn't until later that I found my true shamanic nature. We'll get to that in a minute. My most interesting adventure was to chair an international transdisciplinary conference in Transylvania. How appropriate for a tree doctor, in which I visited the world's most haunted forest, in which people claim flying saucers landed. But don't worry, I'm of Mother Earth. I am not an alien from another creature, from another planet. I might be an alien from another universe, but that's another story. Anyway, I finished these adventures, but really got grounded at home. I have a 300-year-old white oak tree in my backyard, and that is the creature that I have done most of my communing with. And we have done work with our children in schools in Cleveland. My wife and I founded 3 public intergenerational schools that engage nature in profound ways, including our Holden Arboretum. And in fact, it was on the occasion a year ago when Joe Brewer and others visited Cleveland to talk to us about bioregions, something we've been talking about in Cleveland for a while, that Sylvanus passed. It was another epiphany. I said, what have I been doing, strutting around on stage, trying to teach people about health? It's not working for me. And I got rather morose, but Silly, the tree in me, was very alive with possibilities. And he said, well, I don't know what you're going to do, Peter. I'm going to go on. I'm going to become an ancestor. I know you, Peter, are interested in studying ancestry at Oxford. What does it mean for me, Sylvanus, your tree character, to become an ancestor? I should remind you that this oak tree and this character were Celtic. They were, as I said a minute ago, shamanistic, but I was becoming a druid from my own Scottish roots. What on earth did my friend Sully do? Well, he went off into hyperspace, into another universe, and I made a film about this. If you want to see it, it's on YouTube. And he became a dragon, a Celtic dragon. What else? The spirit of trees. And that story was told at the International Digital Storytelling Festival last July. Anyway, the dragon in me emerged a few months later when I was in Melrose, a place in the Scottish border that is for me mystical, full of fairies and elven fairy queens and romantics and Romans and Merlins and King Arthurs, looking up at the clouds, and I saw dragons flying by in the clouds. So I became a McCloud. I am Symbion Mc Cloud, the spirit of the oak tree. I'm an interesting dragon because I can breathe different things at different times. I actually have chameleon genes, so I can change color. And my genes allow me to breathe fire and clouds and maybe mist. And what I'm seeking is hybridization. I want to find some nice Eastern dragon to settle down with on some mountaintop and create the kind of vigor that we might find in the cultural space where we look at what Western dragons and Eastern dragons have done for the cultures in which they exist. Chinese dragons bring good fortune. They tend to be friendlier. And for some reason in the East, they don't go around killing dragons. St. George is only one of 50 religious figures in our mythologies that went around killing dragons. Hey, we got it wrong this time too. Anyway, my first production as a dragon was with my grandchildren. We produced a play at Christmas time where my daughter, the elf of colors, helped the dragon find his tail. Yes, I had lost my tail. T-A-L-E. Oh, oops, T-A-I-L. Dragons can't spell very well. So as you understand, tail and tail. So I had lost my tail, and the kids had to help me find my tail. But I am finding my tail. I am finding my story. And thank you for allowing me to share that today. I think I've gone on far too long, and I want to just bring us back to the title that I gave to this presentation, which I never told you about. And that is that this is an opportunity for Symbion Mc Cloud to challenge the wetiko. That's the Native American term that's spelt in different ways, that's shared by other cultures, of the cultural virus that has taken over our world. It's a cultural virus that does not allow us to see our relationships to nature, to be kin with each other and with nature. So to me, that cultural virus can be called many different things, but I actually think it's modernity. I think that Western modern culture is a cultural virus that we can't see. We don't even know we're sick. So as a dragon, I am committing to you trying to create stories with kids and with elders that are playful but serious in trying to challenge where we as a species are going together. Because if we don't find those connections, we will succumb to a virus that will have our species join the sixth extinction, that loss of biological diversity that we have created and which we now run the risk of joining. So brothers, sisters, trees, fellow dragons, use your imagination and share some stories. And thank you for letting me share mine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. I'm so curious. Oh, go ahead.
I just turned on the recording again because it was. Thank you for honoring our time together. Would you just reflect on that for the beginning? Sometimes stories start and stop in abrupt ways, and technology doesn't help. Here, I'm gonna use my magic cane to.
What's the magic cane gonna do?
Well, this is my dragon cane. It's wood and it has a dragon head. It's gonna talk. It's gonna say technology there in the computer. We need to have some symbionic wisdom. This is not a time for you to go glitchy. Let's listen.
Well, it's so interesting because, okay, so I'll tell you a couple. First of all, let me just reiterate for your recording. I just feel so privileged that you are willing to share your stories with me, and that I've seen your stories evolve and change over time. And, based upon your learning, but also your yearning, your sense of, I want to say urgency, but the messages that are so critical for humanity, and just exploring different ways of sharing those that might resonate for people, but also create containers for people to explore them themselves, like through the stories. And so, yeah, as I listened to your story, I felt some sadness when I heard about Silly. There was a sense of sadness because um, and then a sense of kind of like hope of thinking of what being an ancestor looks like in terms of the wisdom and pointing us in the direction that Silly was so important to Silly. Like I don't want that to be lost. There's a piece of like ancestry that is so critical to continue to pay attention to, I guess. So I felt a little sad with Silly, and then a sense of renewed hope. And then really am so curious about the sense of the virus right now, or the, what did you call it, with the culture of modernity and our disconnection of our relationships with nature. It wasn't just a virus, it was something else.
So wetiko is the North American indigenous
Mm-hmm.
term.
Mm-hmm.
Some people call it the meta crisis or the poly crisis. So we have modern.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the kind of the crisis of this age is our disconnection with our relationship with nature, and probably from a standpoint of wetiko as well, to ourselves and to each other. It's just a sense of disconnection, and the antidote to that is connection. But how do you establish that sense of connection? And you're proposing storytelling is a very important way. What are some other ways that we work to, what's the next, if we think about like the dynamics of how do we talk about evolution from this standpoint, or transformation? Like, where do you go from the crisis of modernity? What does that look like?
So I think these stories can lead us in the direction of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an important theme for these stories, which is
Mm-hmm.
why this idea that we in the West tend to want to kill dragons. But the other thing I think is that the right stories have us question our own stories, and they question the words that we use. Because, for example, Anthropocene comes from a white, you could call it the white nanocene. I mean, it's the patriarchy, the capitalistic patriarchy. Symbiocene comes from the word symbios, or symbiogenesis, which comes from Lynn Margulan and James Lovelock, who envisioned the whole planet, Gaia, as having some kind of connectivity that I think those kinds of words challenge the disconnection models that we've seen in the polycrisis. And I'll say one other word that's coming into the fore, because it's the 100th anniversary, is the noosphere. So does Gaia have a spirit? Does Gaia have a mind? That was invented by the Catholic Jesuit priest who was not much liked by the Pope for understandable reasons, who was also a paleontologist, who actually discovered what was then called Peking man. So this was a man who saw the world moving towards some kind of interconnected mind, in which artificial intelligence, so-called, and trees and people could contribute, that would allow the emergence of a kind of collective wisdom and compassion. So I've kind of intermingled some of the threads that I had said already. It's stories, it's stories of compassion, it's stories of connectedness, it's big stories, it's stories that place us in the almost 4 billion years of history of life.
Would you also add on, in addition to stories, experiences of compassion? I think about intergenerational schools where students and of all ages, younger and older, have those experiences of compassion. How do you make sense of that within the direction that we need to go?
Well, you've just added a really important word for me, experience. Because I say our learning in the intergenerational schools are narrative-based, they're relationship-based, and they're experience-based. You know, we try to get our kids out of the classroom, our undergraduates out of the classroom, to learn. But I would say, and I'm kind of imagining myself walking around campus teaching undergraduates about the place they live in, filming it. Actually with a 360 camera on the end of a staff. You're living a story. We're living a story all the time. What does it mean for us to think of experiences, because we are blessed by memories and we're blessed by abilities to plan. So we plan our experiences and we remember our experience. So in many ways, to paraphrase Muriel Rukeyser, the universe is not as much made of atoms as it is made of stories. So maybe life itself is a story. I wondered on one occasion whether actually there's a story god that decided to create human beings just because she wanted the stories to continue, and they needed a biology to perpetuate the stories.
I love that. That like disrupts kind of the linearity of how stories get created by biology versus the other way around, biology creating the stories or enacting the stories.
Well, I think biology is an interesting word. Biology what is biology? It's a word we invented. It ain't biology doesn't exist in nature. It exists in our minds as a word. But listen, you and I are big social constructivists. I'm an eco-social reconstructivist. We have to think about the words we use in relationship to where they emerged in nature.
I love it. So what is your biggest hope as Symbion in your life right now? What's your purpose in life right now, Symbion? And what gives you the most hope?
So listen, I already said I can change color. What I didn't say is I can go on there, I can teleport anywhere in the world.
Ooh.
Fly through time. Frankly, trees are a little sedentary, so clearly Silly. By the way, Silly is not gone.
Okay.
He passed, but he didn't pass on. He didn't pass out. I think he passed in.
He passed in.
Yeah, so don't feel so bad for Silly, because Silly is he's an ancestor, but our ancestors are with us. So
Silly kind of transformed a little bit. Like Silly may have wanted the vehicle of transformation himself.
I've constructed some images of asking artificial intelligence, asking DALL-E or whoever, show me a dragon emerging from a tree.
Ooh.
And actually it occurred with fire, which is interesting because the elements are at work here. The wood, dragon, fire, clouds.
Yeah.
So the elements are not different. They're merging. So the hope. That by playing around, which is what I do, with things like Symbion and with my grandkids, who are my best collaborators in many ways around play, that we can kind of animate and enchant the world. Our species is probably going to go extinct sometime. I mean, the sun is going to, get hot and the planets, but that's not for a while. The real tragedy is that we're at risk of going extinct sooner than Mother Nature we would have liked. She would have liked a more responsible species that interpreted the relationship to nature as stewardship, not domination.
Yeah.
So if I can send that message, then I'll say one other thing. I don't know whether Symbion will die with me when Peter Whitehouse dies. I'm digitized, but I want to be a good ancestor. I think that's that's Peter speaking. Silly through the trees. What does it mean to have some impact that goes on a little bit after you're gone? You're biologically returned to the soil. So death is a part of my thinking about the future. And I think if there's the greatest challenge that we face as a species is actually to find hope in death, to find hope in that is what allows life to do its work. Without death, I sometimes say we die to have sex, or is that right? I mean, basically, we as creatures that create through that process to die, to allow those recombinations of genes that we've just created in our children to thrive in a world that we can't be in because we're already overpopulating the world. So we have to go to let the future emerge.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Have you written about that?
Writing is hard for me about this. I have, I am. I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah. That's a powerful piece that you just shared right there about hope and death. And kind of if we think, because you are a futurist, that's one of your greatest strengths, you're thinking about death from a futurist perspective, which replaces fear and it brings hope for the future by recognizing death as an imperative part of our contribution to future generations. Like that's pretty powerful right there. Would you say that's kind of, did I miss anything there or?
No, I love our friendship. I love you because you can, we I guess I'll use the word synchronicity. We think symbiotically, meaning we have a relationship to be together. And the challenge is, how do you find that unity amongst diversity? Celebrate. But the unity we have as living creatures is we die. So I mean, to me, that's another part of that hope. I mean, it's like that's something we all go through. So why do we hide things that we all go through? I mean, we tend to hide. Sorry, we tend to hide reproduction, sex. That's a private thing. And I'm not saying it should be a public thing, but I am saying these things that are fundamental to life, reproduction and death, we tend to try to put in the closet because we're essentially denying our animal nature. We are
that's that disconnection to nature again.
It's the disconnection over long time periods. Lots of living creatures have died. This is the sixth extinction. Life itself almost went out completely in the past. So life is very tenacious.
Sure is.
I guess the dragon is tenacious and wants to be part of, because dragons have courage, they have intelligence. And so the dragon wants to celebrate the tenaciousness of life as well as the necessity and make death a better process that we all share. And not be us killing each other, which tends to be one of our mechanisms.
When you asked what leads us to hide from like death or to, I don't know, you didn't use these words, but like to banish it, to ignore it, to not, not embrace it, I guess, is, to resist it. It's the first thought that came to my mind was fear, and when you replace, and fear is a disconnection. And when you replace it with some sense of hope, some sense of possibility, some other way of seeing it, it helps kind of create an opening there a little bit. It's a strong narrative, though, of death being despair,
Well,
something we should fear, loss.
it's the way to go working on this, because the modern story is the individual is important. Success is important. The ego exists. I mean, to me, I'm in line with Buddhism, as you can see in my yin and yang. I think that there is, in some sense, no self. The self exists collectively. And collective self can, I think, be extended not only to our fellow Homo sapiens, but to all living creatures. I mean, science tends to assume, in its lack of humbleness, or scientism does, that we're a species unique in ways that we certainly, I don't, we are storytellers, for example. Animals tell stories, but not in the same way. But we are not unique in the sense that we're above nature, and we're not unique in the sense that our individual selves ought to be privileged over collective. So, I mean, another way of talking about what's happening is we're going from the me to the we, and that tension between me and we has always existed in human beings. We want to share our own genes, but we're not going to be able to share our own genes unless we're part of a community of organisms that also have that same ambition. How do you develop a sense of self that you can share with other people and other living creatures? I think, and then in that process, you transcend yourself, because I also think this is a post-secular age. This is a spiritual process that we're about, and if we can't figure out how to think of ourselves as transcendent creatures, then we can't think of ourselves. Then we can't think of death, and we have to invent what to me are strange stories about worlds and universes where we go to after we die. No, we stay in this world, we stay in this universe, and we have done something to create to that collective well-being, not our own individual. Boy, I'm really going on in a storm here.
You're doing good. You go. You can go, Symbion. Flapping your wings, creating currents of energy and change.
So, can I get your permission, so to speak, because we talked about this before by email? I wouldn't mind putting this up on YouTube. Do you mind?
If it's useful, please do. Yeah, why not? Extend the conversation.
Well, you asked me a minute ago whether I'm writing about this, and I am.
Good.
On the other hand, this happens to be the year of the wood dragon. Probably I'm one of the relatively few people who had a tree character develop into a dragon. So
I would say probably so.
I claim privilege in this year. But you said a minute ago, have you been writing about this? And writing is part of the problem, isn't it? Publish or perish nonsense. It is oral. It's in the oral narrative forms. I think that we have to rediscover some of these things. So the idea that we've shared a story here, and thank you for listening to mine and reflecting to it, is in many ways more important than we wrote a paper. Not that you and I have. So who knows?
Yeah, sometimes I think for me, I really like the opportunity to reflect and see what emerges through like when you and I had that opportunity to write the paper together, there was an opportunity for us to play with ideas in the written form that make it kind of accessible for others too, in some ways. So it's just another format of making sense together, and it sort of does stop a little bit. I mean, we can share our writing with others and get feedback, but it does feel very limited, doesn't it? Like you've written it, you've said it, now it's set, versus an ongoing kind of storytelling and narrative.
Well, I mean, if you were to look at my office suite here, you would find I have bookshelves in my bathroom. So I am a believer in books. I'm a bibliophile. But if I look around the rooms in my kids' houses, even though we've given my grandchildren lots of dragon books, I think, you know, this generation is into movies and videos and
different forms of story and forms of communication.
and we can lament that as readers, vociferous readers, but I think we can also say this is a time of transmedia. This is a time where you have to get your story out in different ways.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at our time together. I know I was planning to take a walk with you. What you going to do next? I was going to do it here, but it's raining a bit, and I have my 1 o'clock call. So I guess the last thing I would request from you
Time is it?
Is a burst of courage and humility both. I may take something of what we shared today into the space where there are a whole bunch of indigenous elders and scientists and young people who are trying to think about bioregions, particularly the Lake and Lake Ontario. So it's a very different space than the space of our personal relationship, where I can share anything. And in that space, I have to be a bit more skillful. So there you go. Wisdom, skill, and courage.
Okay.
Humility. So here, hold on to my stick, and you can grab my stick. There, you got it. Okay, all right.
Send it along to you, my friend. Yeah. I think it's important hearing like the narrative, and when I'm thinking about your audience of, you know, people really engage deeply in this work, as you get to kind of the calling of the time that you're inviting, that's based upon the wisdom of Indigenous, it's based upon that Indigenous wisdom. I think that's where that humility comes in, of really honoring that Indigenous wisdom and knowledge that is informing Symbion and the kind of crisis of this moment, and the opportunity and the hope for the future and what that looks like. But a lot of that is informed by Indigenous wisdom and cultures.
And you're right, and that's why I will give the title in the beginning. Symbion meets the challenge of Wetiko, because I'm using their language. I'll say one other thing quickly, Kristen. I was co-attending when I was at this meeting, a meeting on the co-production of knowledge in the Sault Ste. Marie and the land of the Chippewa, put on by the National Academy of Sciences and Indigenous scientists and community members. And it was a clash of culture. I mean, it was the National Academy of Science as the collaborator, as the scientists who came in, fit into our process, you know, co-production on our terms. So in many ways, that one was more eye-opening than the one that I'm participating in. That one involved almost a disruption of a healthy disruption of process. The tribe said, you know, don't perpetuate the pathologies of colonization by the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Let me know how it goes.
Okay, I will. Don't worry. Okay, have a great walk. And
okay, give my love to Kathy.
Will do. See you next time.
Okay. Bye, my friend.